Darius Carter, a successful black entrepreneur known for his sharp business acumen and generous spirit, had always been a regular at the city's most exclusive venues. He was a man who had worked hard to build his empire, and his reputation preceded him wherever he went. After a long day of meetings, Darius decided to unwind by visiting the Velvet Room, an upscale club that boasted a guest list of the city's elite. It was a place where deals were made and social connections strengthened, and Darius had become a familiar face among the regulars. That night, dressed impeccably in a tailored suit that reflected his status, Darius approached the entrance, fully confident that his name would be on the guest list. As he handed his ID to the bouncer, a large man with a stern expression, Darius noticed a flicker of hesitation in the man's eyes. The bouncer glanced at the list, then back at Darius, before clearing his throat. "Sorry, sir," the bouncer said, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "Your name's not on the list tonight." Darius frowned, certain that there had to be a mistake. He had been invited personally by the club's owner, and had never had any trouble gaining entry before. "That can't be right," Darius replied, maintaining his calm. "I was personally invited by the owner. Can you double-check the list?" The bouncer barely looked at the list again before shaking his head. "Rules are rules," he said curtly, still avoiding eye contact. "You're not on the list, so you can't come in." As Darius stood there, a sense of humiliation began to creep in. He could feel the eyes of other patrons in line boring into him, hear the whispers and see the curious glances. The humiliation was compounded by the fact that many of these people were acquaintances, fellow business leaders and socialites who knew him well. Darius knew what was really happening. This wasn't about the list. This was about the color of his skin. He had faced this kind of subtle, insidious racism before, but it never got easier. Swallowing his pride, Darius asked to speak with the manager, hoping that a quick conversation could resolve the situation. But when the manager arrived, the cold, dismissive attitude he received was no different. The manager, a middle-aged man with a smug expression, simply echoed the bouncer's words. "I'm sorry, Mr. Carter, but we can't make any exceptions. If you're not on the list, there's nothing we can do." Darius felt a mix of anger, disappointment, and hurt. This wasn't just a personal affront. It was a stark reminder of the racial barriers that still existed, even in spaces where he was supposed to be an equal. Without another word, Darius turned and walked away from the club, his mind already racing with thoughts of how he would respond to this blatant act of discrimination. He knew he couldn't let this slide. Something had to be done. As Darius walked away from the Velvet Room, the sting of humiliation still fresh, he knew that ignoring what had just happened was not an option. The familiar city lights blurred as he made his way to his car, lost in thought. This wasn't just about him being turned away. It was about standing up against the systemic racism that still lingered in places like this, cloaked in rules and policies that seemed neutral on the surface but were anything but. That night, back at his penthouse, Darius sat in his living room, the city skyline visible through the floor-to-ceiling windows. His mind replayed the events at the club, and with each recollection, his resolve strengthened. He thought about the countless other black men and women who had likely faced similar humiliations at other establishments, those who didn't have the platform or the resources to fight back. Darius knew that he had the means to make a statement, to challenge the status quo in a way that could not be ignored. He picked up his phone and began making calls. The first was to his lawyer, a sharp and trusted advisor who had helped Darius navigate the complexities of business and the occasional legal battle. He explained the situation, laying out his thoughts on possible legal actions against the club. The lawyer listened carefully, acknowledging the blatant discrimination Darius had faced. Together, they discussed the potential for a lawsuit, not just for personal retribution, but to set a precedent that could challenge the practices of similar establishments. But Darius wasn't content with just a legal battle. He wanted to go further. He called his public relations team next, instructing them to prepare for a media blitz. He wanted the story out there, not just in the context of his own experience, but as a broader conversation about racial discrimination in upscale venues. His team was on board immediately, understanding the importance and the potential impact of Darius's stand. As the night wore on, Darius began to formulate a plan that went beyond just legal and media action. He wanted to strike at the heart of what the Velvet Room and places like it represented, the idea that they could decide who was worthy of entry based on race, wrapped in the guise of exclusivity. The more he thought about it, the more a new idea began to form in his mind, one that would not just retaliate but redefine the game entirely. By the time the first rays of morning light began to filter through his windows, Darius had made up his mind. He would return to the Velvet Room, but not as a patron seeking entry. He would return in a way that would force everyone, from the club's management to the patrons who had witnessed his earlier humiliation, to confront the reality of their actions. And this time, they wouldn't be able to ignore him. Over the next few days, Darius moved with a quiet intensity, his every action focused on the plan he had devised. He knew that this wasn't just about making a statement. It was about ensuring that his response was powerful enough to resonate far beyond the walls of the Velvet Room. He called on his network, people he knew in high places, those who had influence and were ready to support his cause. First, Darius connected with his close friend and business partner, Marcus, who was not only a fellow entrepreneur but also someone who had faced his share of racial discrimination. Marcus listened to Darius's plan with interest, offering his full support. Together, they brainstormed ways to amplify the impact of what Darius was about to do. Marcus suggested leveraging social media to build anticipation, teasing that something big was coming without giving away the details. Darius liked the idea. It would create a buzz and ensure that when he made his move, everyone would be watching. Next, Darius reached out to a few influential figures in the community, people who had experienced similar discrimination or who were vocal advocates for racial equality. He wanted them to be part of what he was planning, to stand with him in solidarity. They agreed without hesitation, recognizing the significance of what Darius was trying to achieve. With his allies in place, Darius turned his attention to the logistics. He knew that simply walking back into the Velvet Room wouldn't be enough. He wanted to make a point that would leave a lasting impression, not just on the club staff but on the entire community. After discussing with his team, they decided on a grand gesture, something that would be both symbolic and impossible to ignore. On the day before his planned return, Darius made a final visit to his lawyer. Together, they reviewed the details of the lawsuit they would file against the club for racial discrimination. They ensured that every angle was covered, that the evidence was solid and the case was airtight. Darius knew that this legal action, combined with what he was about to do, would send a message that discrimination, no matter how subtle, would not be tolerated. As the day of the comeback approached, Darius felt a mixture of anticipation and resolve. He had done everything he could to prepare, and now it was just a matter of execution. He spent the evening before with his closest friends, discussing the plan and making sure everyone knew their role. They toasted to what was about to happen, each of them aware that they were about to be part of something significant. That night, as Darius lay in bed, his mind was clear. He knew that what he was about to do would cause a stir, that it would make headlines and force people to confront the issue of racial discrimination in a way that couldn't be brushed aside. But more than that, he knew that it was the right thing to do. The next day, the Velvet Room and everyone in it would see a side of Darius they had never expected, and they would never forget it. The day of Darius's return to the Velvet Room dawned with an electric atmosphere. Word had already spread through whispers and social media posts that something big was going to happen at the club that night. People from all over the city, intrigued by the mystery, were talking about it. The club's management, still unaware of the specifics, could sense the anticipation but had no idea what was coming their way. As evening approached, Darius prepared himself. He chose a sleek, tailored suit, a symbol of the success and self-worth that he refused to let anyone diminish. It was not just about looking good. It was about presenting himself in a way that commanded respect, in contrast to the disrespect he had been shown. He took a deep breath as he adjusted his tie, knowing that tonight would be a defining moment, not just for him but for everyone who had ever been in his position. Marcus and a few other close friends met Darius at his home before they all headed to the club together. They reviewed the plan one last time, making sure that every detail was covered. With a final nod of agreement, they stepped out, ready to make their way to the Velvet Room. The drive to the club was filled with a quiet tension. Darius could feel the weight of what he was about to do, but he was not nervous. He had prepared for this moment, and now it was time to act. As they approached the club, the sight of a line of people waiting to get in reminded Darius of the night he was turned away. This time, though, things would be different. As Darius and his entourage stepped out of their cars, they immediately drew attention. Heads turned, and conversations hushed as people recognized him from the rumors circulating online. The club's doorman, the same one who had turned him away before, stared in disbelief as Darius walked confidently toward the entrance. The doorman hesitated, unsure of what to do, but Darius simply gave him a calm, knowing smile as he walked past. Inside the club, the atmosphere was electric. The music thumped through the speakers, and the dance floor was packed with people. But as Darius entered, a ripple of awareness spread through the crowd. Eyes followed him as he made his way to the center of the room. He was not alone. His friends were with him, along with the influential community figures who had agreed to support him. Darius didn't waste any time. He walked directly to the VIP section, a place that symbolized exclusivity and power in the club's hierarchy. The section had been empty, reserved for someone else, but Darius knew that tonight it belonged to him. As he stepped into the VIP area, he turned to face the crowd, and for a moment, the entire club seemed to hold its breath. What happened next would be something no one in the Velvet Room would ever forget. As Darius stood in the VIP section, the entire club watched in anticipation. The tension in the air was palpable. Darius's presence commanded attention, and everyone knew something significant was about to happen. He looked around the room, making eye contact with as many people as he could, ensuring that his message would be received loud and clear. With a slow, deliberate motion, Darius raised his hand, signaling the DJ to cut the music. The sudden silence was jarring, and all eyes were fixed on him. He stepped forward, gripping the microphone that had been discreetly handed to him. The spotlight overhead illuminated him, making him the undeniable focus of the room. "Good evening, everyone," Darius began, his voice steady and filled with a quiet strength. "Some of you might remember me from a few nights ago when I was denied entry to this very club. I was turned away, not because of how I was dressed or how I behaved, but because of the color of my skin." A murmur of shock and recognition rippled through the crowd. People began to whisper to one another, realizing that they had either witnessed the incident or heard about it afterward. The club staff, including the doorman who had refused Darius entry, watched with growing unease as the situation unfolded. "I'm here tonight," Darius continued, "not just to enjoy the club, but to make a statement. This place, and many like it, need to understand that discrimination has no place in our society. Not in our neighborhoods, not in our workplaces, and certainly not in our social spaces." The crowd, initially stunned into silence, began to nod and murmur in agreement. Darius's words resonated with many, especially those who had faced similar discrimination. He spoke not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever been marginalized or mistreated because of their race, ethnicity, or background. Darius then gestured toward the group of community leaders who had joined him. "These are the people who stand with me. We're not here to cause trouble. We're here to show that we belong. We're here to show that we will not be excluded or pushed aside. We will take our rightful place, wherever that may be, with pride and dignity." By now, the mood in the room had shifted from one of curiosity to one of solidarity. People began to clap, slowly at first, but then more enthusiastically as Darius's message sank in. The applause grew louder, echoing off the walls of the club, and soon, the entire room was on its feet, applauding Darius's courage and conviction. In that moment, Darius had transformed the VIP section from a symbol of exclusivity and privilege into a platform for equality and respect. His bold statement had turned the tables on those who had tried to keep him out, and now, he was being celebrated by the very people who had once been complicit in his exclusion. As the applause continued, Darius knew that this was only the beginning. He had made his point, but there was still work to be done. The next steps would be crucial in ensuring that the change he sought would be lasting and meaningful. The atmosphere in the club shifted after Darius's bold statement. The energy was different now, charged with a sense of purpose and unity. People who had come for a night of fun found themselves caught up in a moment much bigger than they had anticipated. Conversations buzzed with newfound awareness, and many clubgoers began to see the space, and each other, in a new light. Darius and his group of community leaders became the center of attention. People approached them with words of support, shaking hands, and exchanging contact information. What had started as a personal stand against discrimination was now blossoming into a broader movement, right there in the heart of the nightlife. The club's management, initially taken aback by Darius's speech, realized the gravity of the situation. They quickly moved to engage with Darius and his group, seeking to address the incident and avoid further backlash. The manager, a middle-aged man with a strained expression, approached Darius cautiously. "Mr. Anderson," the manager began, his voice hesitant, "on behalf of the club, I want to apologize for what happened to you the other night. It was wrong, and it does not reflect our values. We are committed to making this right." Darius listened, his expression measured. He could sense the sincerity in the manager's voice, but he also knew that words were not enough. The apology was a start, but it had to be followed by concrete actions. "I appreciate your apology," Darius replied, his tone firm but fair. "But what's more important is what you do next. This can't just be a one-time thing. There needs to be a change in how you operate, not just here, but in every space like this. Discrimination, in any form, needs to be actively rooted out." The manager nodded vigorously. "You're absolutely right. We're going to take steps to ensure this never happens again. We'll be conducting sensitivity training for all our staff, and we'll be reviewing our policies to make sure they're inclusive and fair." Darius appreciated the gesture, but he knew the impact of the moment could reach further. "I want to be involved in those changes," he said. Not just here, but I want to work with other clubs, businesses, and institutions to make sure this isn't just a one-time fix." The manager agreed, recognizing the opportunity to turn this situation into a positive force for change. They exchanged contact information, setting the stage for a partnership that could extend beyond the walls of this single club. As the night continued, the club began to return to its usual rhythm, but the events of the evening lingered in the air. People danced and laughed, but there was an undercurrent of reflection, a recognition that they had witnessed something important. Darius had taken what could have been a moment of personal humiliation and turned it into a powerful statement of resilience and unity. By the time Darius and his group left the club, the energy around them was buzzing with anticipation for what was to come next. The night had been a success, but it was clear that this was just the beginning of a larger movement for change. The following day, news of Darius's speech and the events at the club began to spread. Social media was abuzz with posts, videos, and photos from the night. People who had been in the club shared their experiences, recounting how they had witnessed something transformative. The hashtag #StandWithDarius started trending, as more and more people expressed their support for his stand against discrimination. Local news outlets picked up the story, with headlines like "Man Turns Personal Injustice into a Movement for Change" and "Club Incident Sparks Call for Inclusivity in Nightlife." Darius found himself fielding calls from reporters, community leaders, and even local politicians who wanted to learn more about what had happened and how they could be involved in making changes. Realizing the momentum was building, Darius decided it was time to take the next step. He gathered his friends and the community leaders who had supported him at the club, and together they began to organize. They planned a series of town hall meetings, where people could come together to discuss their experiences with discrimination in public spaces and brainstorm solutions. "We need to keep this conversation going," Darius said during one of their planning sessions. "It's not just about what happened to me. It's about making sure that no one else has to go through the same thing, whether it's at a club, a restaurant, or anywhere else." The group decided to focus their efforts on raising awareness and advocating for policy changes that would promote inclusivity and diversity. They began reaching out to other businesses in the city, encouraging them to review their practices and make commitments to equality. Some businesses were resistant at first, but many saw the value in being part of a positive change. Darius also worked closely with the club's management to implement the changes they had discussed. They organized sensitivity training sessions for the staff, developed a more inclusive hiring process, and created a clear code of conduct that would be enforced to prevent future incidents of discrimination. The club became a model for other establishments in the city, showing that change was not only possible but also beneficial for business. As the movement grew, Darius found himself becoming a spokesperson for the cause. He was invited to speak at events, participate in panels, and share his story with a wider audience. Despite the attention, Darius remained grounded, always emphasizing that this was about more than just one person's experience. "It's about making sure everyone is treated with dignity and respect," Darius would say in his speeches. "We all deserve to feel safe and welcome, no matter where we go." As Darius's movement gained traction, he started receiving support from unexpected places. One day, while preparing for an upcoming town hall meeting, Darius received a phone call that took him by surprise. The voice on the other end introduced himself as Martin Thompson, a well-known local businessman and the owner of several popular nightclubs in the city, including the very club where Darius had been thrown out. "Darius," Martin began, his tone sincere, "I've been following what's been happening, and I want to apologize for what you went through at my club. That incident never should have happened, and I'm sorry for the pain it caused you." Darius was silent for a moment, taken aback by the unexpected apology. He had expected resistance, perhaps even defensiveness, from the club owner. But not this. "I appreciate your apology, Mr. Thompson," Darius replied cautiously, "but words alone won't change what happened. We need to see real action." Martin quickly agreed. "I couldn't agree more. That's actually why I'm calling. I want to help. I've seen the changes you're advocating for, and I believe in them. I'd like to partner with you to make sure all of my clubs are places where everyone feels welcome and safe." Darius felt a mix of emotions: relief, skepticism, and a cautious sense of hope. "What exactly do you have in mind?" he asked. "I'd like to start by implementing the changes you suggested: staff training, an updated code of conduct, and a commitment to diversity in hiring," Martin explained. "But I don't want to stop there. I want to use my platform and resources to support your movement and help spread your message across the city. If we work together, I believe we can make a real difference." Darius was intrigued but still wary. He had seen too many empty promises in the past. "This can't just be about saving face or protecting your business, Mr. Thompson. If we're going to work together, it has to be about genuine change." Martin's voice softened. "I understand your concern, Darius, and I want you to know that I'm serious about this. I've done a lot of soul-searching over the past few weeks, and I realize that I have a responsibility, not just as a business owner, but as a member of this community, to do better. I'm ready to listen and to learn." After a brief pause, Darius responded, "All right, let's do this. But we're going to do it right. I want full transparency and accountability throughout this process." "Agreed," Martin said. "I'll arrange a meeting with my staff, and we can get started right away." As Darius hung up the phone, he couldn't help but feel a sense of cautious optimism. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but with allies like Martin Thompson, he was starting to believe that real change was possible. And as word of their partnership spread, it became clear that others in the community were ready to stand with them. With Martin Thompson's support, the momentum of Darius's movement grew exponentially. News of their partnership spread quickly through the city, reaching beyond the nightclub scene and into the broader community. It wasn't just about one man's experience anymore. It was about the entire city coming together to confront and dismantle systemic discrimination. Darius and Martin held a press conference to announce their plans for reform, with reporters and community members in attendance. Martin spoke first, acknowledging the mistakes that had been made and the changes that were needed. He detailed the new policies his clubs would adopt, including mandatory diversity and sensitivity training for all employees, a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination, and initiatives to support minority-owned businesses in the area. When Darius took the microphone, he spoke from the heart. "This isn't just about me," he began, his voice steady and strong. "It's about every person who's ever been made to feel less than, who's been told they don't belong. We're here to say that those days are over. We're here to build a city where everyone is welcome, where diversity is celebrated, and where hate has no place." The crowd erupted into applause, and Darius felt a surge of pride and hope. He knew that this was only the beginning, but it was a powerful start. The press conference made headlines, and soon, other business owners and community leaders were reaching out, eager to join the cause. The movement began to take on a life of its own. Volunteers organized community events, rallies, and educational workshops to raise awareness and promote unity. Local artists and musicians lent their talents to the cause, creating powerful works that highlighted the importance of diversity and inclusion. Schools incorporated lessons on civil rights and social justice into their curricula, inspired by the changes taking place in the city. Darius found himself at the center of it all, a reluctant leader who had found his voice through adversity. He continued to work closely with Martin and other allies, ensuring that their efforts remained focused and effective. But he also made sure to take time for himself, to reflect on how far he had come and to gather strength for the challenges ahead. As the movement grew, so did the pressure on those who resisted change. Darius knew that not everyone would support their efforts, and that some would try to undermine them. But he was more determined than ever to see it through. He had seen firsthand the power of a united community, and he knew that together they could achieve anything. One evening, as Darius walked through the streets of his neighborhood, he noticed something different. There was a sense of camaraderie in the air, a feeling of shared purpose that hadn't been there before. People from all walks of life were talking, laughing, and working together. For the first time in a long time, Darius felt a deep sense of peace. As he looked around, he realized that this was the true victory. It wasn't just about changing policies or winning battles. It was about changing hearts and minds. And in that moment, Darius knew that they were on the right path. With the success of the movement and the momentum behind the cause, it was only fitting that the symbol of the change, Martin Thompson's nightclub, would be given a new beginning. Martin announced that the club would undergo a major renovation, not just in its physical appearance, but in its mission and identity. It would reopen under a new name, one that reflected the inclusivity and diversity that had become the movement's cornerstone. The entire city was abuzz with anticipation for the grand reopening. It was more than just a business event. It was a celebration of the progress they had made together. Darius, now a well-known figure in the community, was at the forefront of the preparations. Martin insisted that Darius be the guest of honor, recognizing his role in bringing about the change. On the night of the reopening, the atmosphere outside the club was electric. A diverse crowd gathered, representing all walks of life in the city. The building itself had been transformed, with a sleek, modern design that incorporated elements of art and culture from around the world. The new name, emblazoned in bold letters above the entrance, was Unity Lounge. As Darius approached the entrance, flanked by friends and supporters, he felt a swell of emotion. The last time he had been here, he had been humiliated and cast aside. Now, he was walking in as a symbol of resilience and triumph. The club's security staff, now thoroughly trained and representative of the city's diversity, greeted him warmly, welcoming him in as a VIP. Inside, the transformation was even more striking. The decor was vibrant and eclectic, with murals and art installations that celebrated different cultures and histories. The music was a mix of genres, reflecting the city's rich cultural tapestry. Everywhere Darius looked, he saw people mingling and dancing together, united by a shared sense of purpose and joy. Martin spotted Darius and made his way over, a broad smile on his face. "We did it, Darius," he said, clasping Darius's hand. "This place is everything I hoped it would be, and more. And it wouldn't have been possible without you." Darius smiled, humbled by the gratitude. "This is just the beginning, Martin. There's still so much work to do, but tonight, we can celebrate what we've accomplished." As the night went on, speeches were made, and stories were shared about the journey that had led them to this moment. Darius was invited to speak, and he addressed the crowd with the same honesty and passion that had fueled the movement from the start. "We are all here tonight because we believe in something bigger than ourselves," Darius said, his voice steady. "We believe in a world where everyone is treated with respect, where our differences make us stronger, and where hate and discrimination have no place. This club is a symbol of that belief, and it's up to us to carry it forward, not just here, but in everything we do." The crowd erupted in applause, and Darius felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had come a long way from the man who had been turned away at the door, and now he was leading a movement that had changed the city for the better. As the night drew to a close, Darius took a moment to step outside for some fresh air. The city skyline glittered in the distance, a reminder of how far they had come. He knew there would be more challenges ahead, but for now, he allowed himself to enjoy this victory. Looking up at the stars, Darius made a silent promise to himself. He would continue to fight for what was right, to stand up against injustice, and to use his voice to make a difference. Because if this journey had taught him anything, it was that one person's actions could change the world. As weeks turned into months, the story of what had transpired at Unity Lounge spread far and wide, becoming a beacon of hope and a case study in social change. The nightclub's transformation had not only altered the city's nightlife, but had also sparked broader conversations about equity, inclusion, and the power of community activism. Local businesses began re-evaluating their policies and practices, aiming to foster more inclusive environments. The city government even launched an initiative to promote diversity and inclusion in public and private spaces, inspired by the movement Darius had ignited. For Darius, life took on a new direction. He was invited to speak at universities, conferences, and community centers, sharing his story and advocating for social justice. His voice became a powerful tool in the fight against discrimination, and he used it to empower others who had faced similar struggles. His story inspired countless people, and he received messages of gratitude from individuals who had found the courage to stand up for themselves because of his example. Despite his newfound recognition, Darius remained humble and grounded. He continued to work closely with Martin and the Unity Lounge team, ensuring that the club stayed true to its mission. They regularly hosted community events, fundraisers, and cultural nights, turning the space into a hub for positive change. The club's profits were partially donated to local charities supporting marginalized communities, further solidifying its role as a force for good in the city. The bond between Darius and Martin grew stronger, founded on mutual respect and a shared vision for the future. Martin, who had once been solely focused on his business, found new purpose in the work they were doing together. He became an advocate for inclusivity, not just in his club, but in the broader business community, using his influence to encourage other entrepreneurs to follow suit. One day, as Darius was walking through the city, he came across a group of teenagers protesting outside a store that had been accused of discriminatory practices. He watched them for a moment, seeing himself in their passion and determination. They were carrying signs that read, "Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere," and chanting for change. Feeling a sense of pride, Darius approached the group and introduced himself. The teenagers recognized him immediately, their eyes widening in admiration. "You're Darius, right? The guy from Unity Lounge?" one of them asked. "That's me," Darius replied with a smile. "What you're doing here is important. Keep standing up for what's right, and don't let anyone tell you your voice doesn't matter." The teenagers nodded, their resolve strengthening in the presence of someone who had walked the path they were now on. Darius spent some time talking with them, offering advice and encouragement, before continuing on his way. As he walked away, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment, knowing that the movement he had helped start was continuing to grow. Later that evening, as Darius sat in his apartment, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He thought about the night he had been kicked out of the club, the pain and humiliation he had felt, and how that moment had ultimately led to something far greater than he could have imagined. He had turned adversity into strength, and in doing so, had helped create a better world for others. With a sense of peace, Darius leaned back in his chair and looked out at the city. It was still a work in progress, But he knew that as long as there were people willing to stand up for what was right, there was hope for a brighter future. And he would be there, every step of the way, continuing the fight for justice, equality, and dignity for all. As time passed, Darius's story became a symbol of how one person's actions can ignite change. Unity Lounge was no longer just a nightclub. It had evolved into a symbol of community and resilience. Its transformation had inspired other businesses in the city to adopt more inclusive practices, and the city itself had begun to embrace the idea of equity as a core value. The media attention around the incident gradually faded, but the impact remained. Darius continued his advocacy work, speaking at schools, businesses, and community organizations. He shared his experiences and encouraged others to stand up against discrimination, reminding them that their voices mattered. His message resonated with many, and slowly but surely, the city began to change. One evening, Darius received an unexpected invitation. The mayor's office had organized a gala to honor individuals who had made significant contributions to the city's progress. Darius was among the honorees. As he stood on stage, accepting his award, he looked out at the audience and saw a sea of faces, some familiar, some not, all united by a shared commitment to making their city a better place. In his acceptance speech, Darius spoke from the heart. He talked about how one moment of injustice had sparked a movement, how a single act of courage had led to meaningful change. He thanked everyone who had supported him along the way, from Martin to the community members who had rallied behind him. "But this isn't just about me," Darius said, his voice steady and clear. "It's about all of us. It's about what we can achieve when we come together, when we refuse to accept things as they are and demand better. It's about the power of one, multiplied by the power of many. Together, we can build a world where everyone is treated with the respect and dignity they deserve." The audience erupted into applause, a standing ovation that lasted several minutes. As Darius looked out at the crowd, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had come a long way from that night outside the club, and in doing so, had helped to make his city a more just and compassionate place. After the gala, Darius stepped outside and took a deep breath of the cool night air. The city lights twinkled around him, and he felt a sense of peace. His journey was far from over. There was still much work to be done, but he knew that he wasn't alone. He had a community behind him, and together, they would continue to push for change. As Darius walked away from the event, he felt lighter, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. He had turned his pain into power, and in doing so, had helped to pave the way for others to do the same. The future was bright, and Darius was ready to face it head-on, knowing that he had made a difference. The night sky stretched out before him, full of possibilities, and as he looked up at the stars, Darius knew that he would keep moving forward, driven by the belief that one person truly can change the world.